Good morning. Today I get to continue on our series on 1 Peter. We've been going through this book. We took a little bit of a break last week, and now we get to dive back into it. I'm going to keep things pretty simple this morning. In my sermon prep, it is a different experience prepping a sermon once you have a little one. So I think just life in general is different. So sermon prepping is also a little bit different. So I got to experience kind of what the new normal is there. But I think there's some very good things in this passage, and I am excited to share them. So essentially kind of my outline, my plan for this morning is we're basically just going to walk through the verses. I'm going to go through them, share some thoughts on them, and then at the end we'll kind of have a little bit of some summarizing thoughts and a little bit of application as well. Gotta know which one of these buttons is the one that sends it forward. Or this one. Nope, the other one. It's an up and down arrow for those who have never seen this, and we did have a little sticker on it that said forward, but that sticker has come off at this point. So down is forward, up is back, in case you're ever up here. I'm sure you'll remember it at that point. So starting off at the start, therefore, since Christ has suffered in the flesh, arm yourselves. So the first thing that I noticed here is, first off, Peter is kind of referencing, he referenced Christ's suffering in the previous chapter, in chapter 3. And so he's now saying that we should be imitators of Christ. Like Christ suffered, they're also going through suffering. And we should be arming ourselves. So right off the hop, I'm like, okay, what does arming yourselves kind of insinuate? Where are we thinking this passage is going, right? So normally if you're arming yourselves, you think you're gearing up for a fight, for a battle. So, all right, we're getting ready to, fight those who are persecuting us maybe, right? These are kind of just some thoughts that might be going through your head as you kind of just start reading this passage. And another thing that I noticed was arm yourselves. This is a plural. It's not just that I'm supposed to be arming myself, but it's a group thing. It's a community thing. Together, we are supposed to be arming ourselves. So then we continue on and we get to explore a little bit more. Arm yourselves also with the same purpose. Oh, well, that changes things a little bit. We can, put the grand sword back up over our fireplace mantle, put the axe away, lock our guns back into our gun closet. Why do we have a grenade? I don't know, but we'll put that away, right? This isn't a physical battle. We're not arming ourselves with physical weapons. We're actually supposed to be arming ourselves with purpose. Okay, and it's the same purpose. So this is the same purpose that Christ has, or Christ had when he was on earth. And so now we start asking, okay, so what is this purpose that we're arming ourselves with, right? If we're not arming ourselves with physical weapons, this might not actually be a physical battle, but what is this purpose that we should arm ourselves with? And with arming ourselves with the same purpose as Christ, and this is kind of a theme throughout the scriptures that as Christians we are called to imitate Christ. And so that was something else that I noticed, that again there's that call to follow Christ's example. Arm yourselves with the same purpose, because he who has suffered in the flesh has ceased from sin, so as to live the rest of the time in the flesh, no longer for the lusts of men, but for the will of God. So if we kind of jump down to the end, we can see the purpose that we should be arming ourselves with is to live for the will of God. So that kind of clears things up, right? We're supposed to be arming ourselves together as a community. Peter's saying, you believers, arm yourselves together with the same purpose that Jesus had, and that purpose is to follow the will of God. But that's kind of jumping over this middle section here. Because he who has suffered in the flesh has ceased from sin. That line, you read that and you go, okay, so what does that mean? Right? Does that mean that if I am physically persecuted, that's like a magic thing that all of a sudden now I'm never going to sin again? Is that what that is meaning? And I think most of us, just from how we have seen our lives live out, can say, and maybe we all haven't had physical persecution. I don't think I would necessarily say that I've ever had physical persecution. I've never been beat up or thrown in jail or whipped for being a Christian. But I don't think that is what Peter is trying to say here. He's not trying to say that it's kind of this magic thing that as soon as you undergo physical persecution, you're never going to have issues with sin again. What I do think he is saying is that there is something, when you believe in something so strongly that you are willing to undergo persecution and physical persecution, right? To be beat up, to be whipped, maybe even to be killed, for this belief, that belief is going to be very strong, and it's going to be strengthened. If you are beat up for your belief and you keep that belief through that persecution, then there is going to be a strength in you of that faith, of that belief that you have. And so I think what he is saying here is that when you undergo these persecutions, that will actually be strengthening your faith, and that the lure of sin versus basically the desiring sinful things, that is actually going to have less of a hold over you, less of a desire for you, and you will desire God's will even more. Because if you're willing to commit to faith, to living for God through the physical persecution, why would you kind of turn around and then be like, oh, hey, let's go sin, right? Like, you have a choice there, right? With persecution, oftentimes you don't necessarily have a choice. If you're unwilling to, totally throw away your faith, you don't have a choice in that. For sin, you have a choice. You can choose to sin, or you can choose to follow God's will. And so when you have that choice, because you have persevered through the persecutions, then Peter is encouraging them, hey, this is basically breaking the desires of sin in your life. And I'm not saying that you, like I said, I'm not saying that you would never struggle with sin again. But I think there is some power in staying strong in your faith through persecution. So this fight that we're gearing up for, that we're arming ourselves for, isn't, like I said, it isn't a physical fight. It's actually, and it's not a fight against those who are persecuting them. It's actually a fight against the sinful desires. It's basically a fight between following sinful desires and following God's will. Continuing on, for the time already past is sufficient for you to have carried out the desire of the Gentiles, having pursued a course of sensuality, lusts, drunkenness, carousing, drinking parties, and abominable idolatries. Peter says most of these people would not have been born necessarily into a Christian family and grown up as Christians. Most of them would have been living a sinful life and then come to become a Christian. And so Peter is saying, guys, you already had a chance to do sinful things, right? Now you're a Christian. You've already done it. Why would you be like, oh yeah, I love God, but I want to do a little bit more sin. Let's dabble a little bit more, right? He's saying, no, you had lots of time to do that. You've done enough sin. You don't need to do just a little bit more sin. You can be done with it now. The other thing that I noticed here is just this list that he lists out here. It seems to me that the world that they lived in, the sinful things that people struggled with, those things seem to be pretty relevant to us today, to our culture here today. These things, sensuality, lusts, drunkenness, carousing, drinking parties, and abominable idolatries, all these things are things that I see people struggling with around me here today in our culture, right? So it's interesting how, just because we're years and years removed from this, the struggles that the people around or of their culture were going through, the sins that they were running to, look quite familiar to those that are available to us today. In all this, they are surprised. This is the Gentiles around them. In all this, the people around them, they're surprised that you do not run with them into the same excesses of dissipation, and they malign you. So this is kind of just a warning and just a notice of Peter telling them, hey, when you act differently, when you are not living a sinful life, the people around you are going to notice that. And they're going to wonder, why are you living this way? And they might even mock you. They'll malign you. They'll say nasty things about you, right? Because they won't understand why you're living the way you're living. And so it's a bit of a warning of kind of, there is a cost that comes from living for God's will and, living a life that is denying those sinful desires and looking to live for God's will in your life. And another thing that I noticed when I read this, he uses some pretty colorful language here. He says, they're surprised you do not run with them into the same excesses of dissipation. So I said, well, let's just double check what dissipation means, right? I had a general kind of, you kind of know what the word means, but you want to look it up just to kind of make sure that you have the full sense of what it means. And so dissipation, it can mean like dispersing, wasting, squandering. And so an excess of dissipation is just over the top wastefulness and squandering. And I thought this was a pretty apt way to describe living a sinful life, because sin can waste time. It can squander away money, relationships, even lives. Sin doesn't care, right? It if you dive deep into sin, you can squander away all these things. And eventually, you can lose your life to sin. And yet, when I think about it, and kind of what Peter is saying here is, when you're caught up in it, you don't necessarily notice it so much. Those who are caught up in living this sinful way, the Gentiles around them, they're confused and they're mocking the Christians, like, why aren't you living like us? You know, we're having fun, we're enjoying these things. Why aren't you living like us? You think you're better than us, right? So it's interesting and in some ways saddening to think about, well, I would say not in some ways, in a lot of ways, it is quite saddening just to start pondering on the brokenness and what sin actually does to people and to their lives. And so, yeah, a little bit of a warning and a explaining, you know, this is what you might expect. And I mean, I'm sure that these people that Peter is talking to, writing to, that, you know, they've probably already experienced this. They're aware of it. But he does note this. And it continues on. So these Gentiles, they're surprised that the Christians are not living like them. They're making fun of them for it. But they will give account to him who is ready to judge the living and the dead. And so there is maybe a little bit of hope of vindication for the Christians, that, you know what? Those who are mocking you, those who are living a sinful life, eventually they will have to stand before God, and as will the Christians, but God is going to judge. And at that point, I'm sure the Christians who are living for God's will are going to feel a lot more comfortable than these Gentiles who have been living in sinful excess. And then we get to the final verse. For the gospel has, for this purpose, been preached, even to those who are dead, that though they are judged in the flesh as men, they may live in the spirit according to the will of God. And this verse I read a lot. This first kind of phrase, for the gospel has for this purpose been preached even to those who are dead. What does that mean? I read it, I reread it, I read the surrounding verses, I thought about it, I read it some more, and I'm asking myself, you know, is this talking about those who are actually physically dead, or is it talking about those who are spiritually dead? Is it talking about those who are like currently dead, that the gospel is being actively preached to those who are currently dead? Or is it talking about those who have had the gospel preached to them and then they died? What's the timing of it? So did a lot of thinking, did some praying on it, talked to Jordan, got some commentaries from him, read through some commentaries, and there is kind of a consensus way to read this and to read this verse of most people think that, you know, this is what Peter was trying to say with this verse. So I will share that, and then I am going to go on a little slight variation or detour just to share kind of a different way that you could read it, just to show I think in the Bible well, we'll get to that when we get to that, in short. So first off, what is kind of the consensus way, what most people think, this is what Peter was trying to say here. So first off, essentially, thinking about the context here, these are persecuted believers who have been scattered around. They're living in exile that Peter is talking to. And kind of the rest of this section has been encouragement for them as they go through different persecutions, kind of encouragement on persevering and what that persecution will do in their lives as far as strengthening their faith, that kind of thing. So what the thought is that here, Peter is essentially encouraging them that those believers who became believers, they had the gospel preached to them, and then now they have died. So they've been persecuted, or maybe they died from natural deaths or natural causes. But essentially, those believers who came to Christ and then now have died, that hope is not lost for them, right? Jesus hasn't come back yet, but that's okay. Hope is not lost for them. They will live in the Spirit yet, according to the will of God. And so essentially, it's an encouragement in this time of persecution that you should still hold on to your faith. You do not need to be sad for those who have died for their faith. And if that happens to you, then you don't need to be fearful of that. But it's an encouragement in this persecution, or in this time of persecution. Does that make sense? Yeah, I see a few nods. So there is another way of reading this, and it's the kind of the spiritual sense. So I want to just touch on that as well, because to me, it's always interesting reading it this way, and I'll kind of walk through it. It's not heretical, right? It's not saying something completely out of line with the rest of the Bible. It makes sense. It's just that maybe it's kind of, it doesn't quite make sense for the passage to all of a sudden start talking kind of in a different line of reasoning. So let me just get into it, and then that will maybe make a bit more sense. So if we would read this as a little bit more talking about those who are spiritually alive or spiritually dead, kind of starting off actually in the previous verse, they will give account to him who is ready to judge the living. So that might be the Christians, those who are spiritually living, and the dead, or the spiritually dead, the non-believers. And then, but the gospel has for this purpose been preached even to those who are spiritually dead, the Gentiles around them. Gospel has been preached to them, that though they are judged in the flesh as man, so even though they are currently sinners, and so they are currently being judged based on that, there's condemnation because they are sinful. They may live in the Spirit according to the will of God. So there is the opportunity for them to become a Christian, to accept God's grace and his forgiveness, and they can live according to God's will. And so that is a way that you could read this. And like I said, reading it that way, I don't think saying that those who are currently non-Christians could become Christians, that's not some, radical new idea. That is elsewhere in the Bible. But that kind of takes the end of this passage away from being a continued encouragement to those believers who are experiencing persecution, and just kind of another thing, possibly even addressing a specific concern that he had heard about, that they were concerned. Well, what about these Christians who have died, right? It takes away from that, and then now kind of the end of this passage is now an encouragement for, reaching out to the Gentiles around them, for preaching the gospel, and, let's preach to them so that they can come to know Christ. And like I said, that's not a bad message, but it doesn't quite fit in with the rest of the passage, right? So all that to say, for me, it was, when I was looking through it, it was very interesting to kind of go down this rabbit hole a little bit and just maybe just a little bit of a look into, working through a passage of Scripture that at the beginning I was like, okay, what is this saying, right? And then you work through it, and it was very helpful to have some commentaries to read of people who have, not spent an hour or two reading and looking through this and thinking about this, but might have spent days, and digging into the original language a little bit more and all of this stuff. So it's helpful to have things like commentaries where we can look and we can see, what is the general thought? What do people generally think this is saying? Yeah. So that is a look at our passage for today. So it's definitely, and I think this has come across, but it's basically very much an encouragement to those who are currently going through persecution. And we've just kind of come through the previous passages in Peter. In 1 Peter, he was talking about, how to live as exiles in this foreign land, conduct in the home, at work, with figures of authority. And then now he kind of goes into this teaching on dealing with persecution, kind of just as a general, how do we deal with persecution? What does that look like? What does that do within us? And he has previously urged believers that if you're going to be persecuted for doing good, not for doing evil. And so that kind of continues here as well, where he's saying, desire God's will, follow God's will for your life. Don't desire the sinful things, right? If you're going to be persecuted, at least be persecuted for following God's will, and not for sinful things. And so, what else can we take away from this passage? I think we are in a time and a culture where currently we don't really have much physical persecution, but we may have societal persecution or societal pressures. I think there's definitely, to say that we're not persecuted at all, I don't think that would be true. I think it just looks a little bit different, and it might not be quite as overt as, if you wear a necklace with a cross, then you might get pulled into jail and whipped, right? It's a little bit different, but I don't think we are living in a culture where we just have no persecution ever at all. And so Peter says, arm yourselves with the same purpose as Jesus, which is to follow the will of God. And as I was thinking about this, to me that was kind of the the key verse or the key theme, the key phrase, maybe the action point from this passage was, arm yourselves with the purpose. It's yourselves, so it's a team thing, it's a community thing. As a community of believers, arm yourselves with a purpose, and that is to do the will of God. And so then I thought, well, what is the will of God, right? Kind of maybe the next logical step, at least to me, the next logical step is to think, okay, so what do I do now, right? What is the will of God? And as I was pondering this, as I was thinking about this, I think there's a lot of ways that could go. But this verse that I put in the bulletin is what came to my mind as I was thinking of this. He has told you, O man, what is good, and what does the Lord require of you, but to do justice, to love kindness, and to walk humbly with your God. And so as I was thinking about this, doing justice, it means interacting with those around us. It means interacting with this sinful world, right? Doing justice means that there has to be injustice. And we know there's injustices in this world. And so as we interact with those around us, there's an opportunity for us to do justice. It means treating those around us like they are made in the image of God, which we've been going through in adult Sunday school, talking about what exactly does being made in the image of God look like. And the second point, loving kindness, or in some translations it's translated as loving mercy. Well, what does that look like? And again, it looks like community, right? Can I be a kind person if I'm a hermit in the middle of the desert? Who am I being kind to? Can I be a merciful person if I'm a hermit in the middle of the desert and never interact with anyone? Well, who am I being merciful to, right? If you're being merciful, that means essentially someone owes you something, and you're having grace, you're basically forgiving that debt, right? You're having mercy upon them. You're not taking from them that which you could take from them. So again, being kind, being merciful, to me, it spoke again of interacting with those around us, with this community, which I feel like was kind of a big thing that stuck out in my mind, that this, arm yourselves, it was a communal thing. And then as I was looking through these things, I'm like, oh, justice, kindness, these are also things that require interaction with those around us. And then finally, walk humbly with your God. What does that mean? Well, I think that means if we're going to be humble, we need to acknowledge all that God has done for us. And then we're also pursuing a relationship with Him. We acknowledge that God is God, and we most definitely are not, right? We need to have humility and recognize God